Journal Entry 2. Now that I'd completed my adventure to the end and built a house to provide me with a more permanent, secure and comfortable place to live, I had more time to think about the situation I was in. The doubts that anyone from the company would find me began to creep back into my mind. Was there anybody looking for me? Did the company even notice that I went missing? How long could I be waiting for somebody to find me? All of this uncertainty and worry was beginning to weigh heavily on my mind, so I decided to take a walk with my dog and visited one of the nearby villages. During the events that I wrote about in my previous journal entry, I spotted two different villages. I found one of the villages while I was collecting sugarcane in the savannah biome, and I spotted the second one while I was gathering materials for my house. The reason that I didn't want to go to either of the villages when I first found them was because I was afraid to get the answers to my questions. If I never went and spoke with the villagers, I could always have the hope that they could help me get back home. Up until this point, I was able to distract myself by going on an adventure to the end and building my house, but not any longer. I was unable to silence the doubts, and so I needed to know the answers to my questions. The village was towards the west of my house on a hill. As I entered the village, I looked for someone that might be able to answer the questions that I had. I eventually found someone, and I got the answers that I had been dreading. The answers that made me fear coming to the village and asking the questions. The villager wasn't familiar with any of the places that I had described while I was on my journey, and didn't know if someone was searching for me. The only information that they had was that they heard about the company that I worked for, but didn't know anything else besides that. I still had a small ember of hope that I would find the answers that I wanted and hoped for in the other village that was towards the north. I travelled a short distance to the village and found someone to talk to, and to whom I could ask the questions that I wanted to ask. With each reply to each question, my hope was replaced with despair. I said thank you to the villager for all of their help and left the village. As I walked back to my house, I reminded myself of the fear and uncertainty that I felt before going to the villages. The only piece of hope that remained with me was that someone was out there, somewhere, looking for me. If somebody was out there looking for me, I decided that I should try and help them by creating a beacon. This would require me to defeat a wither and get another star, but if I wanted to complete this objective, first I was going to need to get better enchantment on my items. When I got back to the house, I collected all of the wheat from my farm and went back to the village in the north and traded the wheat for some emeralds. Using the emeralds, I was able to buy an enchanted book with mending from a villager that lived in the village towards the west. Using the enchanted book, I was able to enchant my pickaxe with mending. I returned to the villager to trade the wheat that I had left over. When I got back home, in order to speed up the process of getting emeralds, I used some of the beetroot seeds, pumpkin seeds, and a potato to grow more crops at the farm that I could trade with the villagers. With the help of some bone meal, I was able to get the starting stages of the farm to go a bit faster. After a bit of time and a bit of hard work, I expanded my farm and went to the villagers to trade the crops for emeralds. I then went back to work on the expansion of the farm and traded more crops with the villagers for more emeralds. Now that I had all of the emeralds that I required, I bought the enchanted books and returned back to my house. I climbed the ladder up to the attic where the anvil was, and added the mending enchantment to all of my items. This meant that I didn't have to worry about the durability of my armor and tools as much as I once did in the past. The upkeep of my armor would now be less costly. Back in the place where I used to live before I got lost, I was not able to afford to put the mending enchantment on my items, nor was anyone that I knew able to afford it either. The only people that could were the wealthy. So when one of my items was in need of repair or needed to be replaced, it cost significantly more than to simply repair the item using the mending enchantment. The item also needed to be repaired or replaced much more frequently when it didn't have the mending enchantment. This effect only grew more apparent when the Unbreaking Tree enchantment was also added to the item, which again I nor anyone I knew could afford to buy. The result of this was that in the long run I spent more on the item than if I could have just afforded the mending enchantment and the Unbreaking Tree enchantment in the first place. I crafted a new diamond sword so I could use the enchantment table to try and get the Looting Tree enchantment. After multiple failed attempts, I stopped using the enchantment table and decided to buy an enchanted book with Looting Tree from a librarian. I went back to my farm so I could gather and trade the crops with the villagers for emeralds. If I wanted to spawn a wither so that I could get another star, I was going to need to get wither skeleton skulls. The Looting Tree enchantment would increase the chance of a wither skeleton dropping this item. I was unable to find a librarian that would sell me an enchanted book with Looting Tree, so in the meantime I tried getting the enchantment from an enchantment table. I went back to farming and trading so that I could get more levels to continue to try and get the enchantment using the enchantment table. Before I was able to get the enchantment by using an enchantment table, I found a villager that was selling the enchanted book with looting 2 for 25 emeralds. I bought 2 of the books so I could combine them and get the looting 3 enchantment that I needed. I used the anvil to combine the 2 books together, and then the anvil was used again to put the looting 3 enchantment onto the sword. I went through the nether portal, but first I got some fire resistance potions that I got from piglins while I was bartering for ender pearls, and I also grabbed a golden helmet. The main reason that I wanted the fire resistance potions was that I had protection against the blazes at the nether fortress. I made my way to the nether fortress that I wrote about in my previous journal entry. While in the nether fortress, I made sure to divide it into sections by placing a row of blocks 2 blocks above the ground. This allowed me to walk around the fortress without obstruction, but the wither skeletons would not be able to follow me around the fortress. Unfortunately, other monsters would be able to go under the row of blocks, so I had to continue to be mindful of that danger. I mined out a section of the netherrack that surrounded parts of the nether fortress. I then had to get nether bricks from the fortress so that I could build the floor for the area that I carved out of the wall. This allowed for the chance of me finding wither skeletons to increase. I continued to make my way around the fortress and also ensured that my surroundings were safe. While exploring the nether fortress, I found diamond horse armor and a saddle in one of the chests. Occasionally I would find a group of wither skeletons and try to get a wither skeleton skull. While I was walking through the hallways of the fortress, I always felt the need to look behind me to make sure that nothing was behind me. No matter how much I explored the fortress, I never felt I was safe. Even if I walked through the same hallway 9 times before, I would still feel nervous on the 10th time. After a lot of searching around the nether fortress, I finally got my first wither skeleton skull. But I still had to collect 2 more wither skeleton skulls, so I carried on to look for wither skeletons. And it didn't take long for me to get the second wither skeleton skull. All of the time I spent in the nether and fighting the monsters at the fortress left my shield very damaged. So I went back to my house and got an enchanted book with mending so that I could get the mending enchantment on my shield. Now that I didn't have to be concerned about my shield breaking, I went back to the nether fortress and got the last remaining wither skeleton skulls and returned to the overworld. Putting the mending enchantment on my shield wasn't strictly necessary since I could have made a new one, but I didn't want to have to worry about it breaking in the future and not having a replacement shield. I prepared all of the items that I would need to fight the wither, which included repairing my bow, and then I went down to the cave that was close to my house. I was nervous about having to fight the wither, but if I wanted to get a beacon, then I needed to fight the wither and obtain a nether star. When I reached a part of the cave that contained deep slate, I began making a staircase so I could travel down further. Shortly after starting to create the staircase, I uncovered some diamond ore and collected all of the diamonds. In total I got 20 diamonds. I wished that this bit of good luck was foreshadowing what was about to happen during the fight with the wither. Once I gathered all of the diamonds, I continued to carve out the staircase. As I dug down, I questioned if getting a nether star was worth the risk, but if I wanted to make it easier for somebody to find me, then I needed to get one so that I could craft a beacon. I dug a long tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel I spawned a wither using some soul sand that I got earlier and the 3 wither skeleton skulls. I ran a small distance back down the tunnel and got ready to fight the wither. While I waited for the fight to begin, I asked myself if this was a good idea. It was too late now to reconsider my decisions. My plan was that as the wither came towards me, I would move backwards into the tunnel. From the tunnel I could fire my bow at the wither, and once the wither got to a low enough health, I used my sword. This was similar to a method of fighting the wither that I read about in a journal that was written by someone whose job it was to get nether stars back where I used to live. The fear that I had at the beginning of the fight began to disappear. Eventually I was able to defeat the wither and I gained another star. I went into the cave that was formed by the wither during the fight. I examined the damage that surrounded me. Now that the fight was over, I was able to relax, and I used some of the torches that I had with me to light up the newly formed cave. At the end of the cave, I found some diamonds. This felt like a nice bonus reward for defeating the wither. I got an extra 17 diamonds. Now that I defeated the wither and got a nether star, the most dangerous part of getting a beacon was done. I walked back through the tunnel and climbed up the staircase. I hoped that getting the beacon would be worth the effort and somebody would see it and I could be found. I went to the cave so I could get iron, and while I was in the cave I found a slime. The reason that I needed the iron was that now I needed to get the materials to build the base of the beacon. When I collected a good amount of iron, I returned back up to the surface. I went back to my house and decided where I was going to build a beacon. I chose a spot that was next to the river. This beacon should be able to be seen from a great distance away, and hopefully it would get the attention of anyone who was looking for me. The company could have sent a beacon with each of the couriers, so that it could be used in the type of situation that I find myself in now, but the company rejected this option because it would have resulted in lower profits. The beacon also allowed me to get the regeneration and speed effects. While back in the city that I used to live in, when I made deliveries in the nicer parts of the city, I would often stop and admire the beacons that were dotted all around the place. However, I was never able to stop and look for too long since I had to keep on schedule. Now that I had the beacon built, I wanted to add some decorations around it, so I went and gathered some materials. I started by mining some copper that I found underground so that I could make copper trapdoors. I also made an area where I could put beehives and get honeycomb. I put the beehives next to the pumpkin farm at the back of the campsite. When I was waiting for the honeycomb, I got some mud so that I could craft packed mud. I also got some rooted dirt by growing azalea trees, and I chopped down some spruce trees. I grew the trees behind where I placed the beehives. I had 3 beehives that I would collect the honeycomb from, and I used this honeycomb to wax the copper trapdoors. I also collected some other materials. Once I had all the materials I needed, I started to decorate the beacon. I started by adding the copper trapdoors to the outside of the iron blocks that made up the base of the beacon, and then I made a path that diverged around the beacon and split off into 2 different directions. I continued the path up the hill and towards my house. I used some coarse dirt, packed mud and rooted dirt in addition to the path blocks to construct the path. I added some azalea and flowering azalea leaves to the outside of the path, and also I put some fences with lanterns on top of them next to the path as well. Next I built a small bridge that went across one of the rivers so that I didn't have to swim across the river every time I wanted to visit the village to the north. And then I connected the bridge to one of the paths at the beacon. And again I added the fences with lanterns on top of them and azalea leaves along the side of the path. I ran along the path and past the beacons, and it reminded me somewhat of the beacons back at the city where I used to live. I was beginning to enjoy my time here more and more. It was a nice opportunity to not have to stay on a schedule and be able to enjoy my surroundings. While I was building the path, I decided to create new larger pens for the animals that I have. I went to the bottom of the hill that my house was on. I removed some of the dirt from the side of the hill to create part of the wall of the pen. I then built the rest of the wall using some of the materials that I got from the cave. I cleaned up the area inside the new pen in preparation of moving the cows from the old pen into the new pen. Now that the new pen for the cows was done, I broke a hole in the fence of the old pen and moved the cows into the new pen. Since the new pen was built on the side of a hill, I was able to easily guide the cows over the wall by climbing up the side of the hill a bit. Once the cows were herded into the new pen, I removed the old pen. I also wanted to build a similar design of a pen for the sheep, so I picked a spot next to the cow pen and removed some of the dirt and built a wall. I then moved all of the sheep into the new pen and removed the old pen. This helped to clean up the area a bit more. Since I now had a bridge that went over the river that was to the north of my house, I decided to build a bridge over the river that was to the west of my house. This bridge would also help me get to the village that was on the other side of the river easier. I went and collected all of the materials that I would need to build the bridge. This included again iron so that I could craft lanterns and collecting stripped dark oak logs. This also included me trading the crops that I grew at my farm with the villagers so that I could get emeralds and to repair my tools using the experience points. I also bought some food from the farmers in the village with the emeralds. When my tools were repaired by a small amount, I returned to collecting the materials that I needed for the bridge. On one of the occasions that I was trading with the farmers for food, I decided to buy golden carrots. This also gave me more experience points so that I could repair my axe. I finished collecting all of the materials that I needed, and I went to the river to build the bridge. Before I began collecting all the materials to build the bridge, I expanded the path from the beacon to where the bridge would be built, and now I was ready to build the bridge. The design of this bridge would be different from the first bridge because this river was wider and each side of the river was higher when compared to the first river. Once the bridge was complete, I could now easily cross over the river. As a result of having an easy way across both of the rivers, I decided I would continue the paths to each of the villages. I started with the path that would connect my house to the village towards the west, and then continued the other path to the village towards the north. The new paths allowed for more convenient travel between the villages and my house, and thus the sense of the community has grown. As I write this journal entry and reflect upon the bridges and paths that I have built and the villagers that I have met, I feel that while some of the questions I wrote about at the beginning of this journal entry still remain unanswered, and the ones that were answered, the answers caused me to lose some hope. The answers to all of these questions have become less important in my mind. I no longer find myself wishing for the day that somebody would find me, or even concerning myself with the thought that if the company noticed I was gone. And while it is true that I still wish to be found, I am willing for that time to be off in the distance somewhere. Signed, Wren.